I've always been the sensitive one in my family, the one who cried too easily, who got sick more often than my siblings, who needed more rest, more care, more attention. At least, that's how they saw it. The truth was more complicated, but in a family that valued stoicism above all else, my physical vulnerabilities were viewed as character flaws rather than genuine medical concerns. My name is Cassie, and I'm 26 years old. I grew up in a household where illness was treated with suspicion rather than sympathy. My father, a former military man turned construction foreman, believed that most ailments could be overcome with willpower. My mother, though slightly more compassionate, deferred to his judgment on most things, including whether any of us kids were really sick or just trying to get out of responsibility. My older brother Jake took after our father, rarely complaining even when he broke his arm in a football game and finished playing before seeking medical attention. My younger sister Emma learned early on to hide any weakness, pushing through fevers and infections with a determination that earned my father's approval. And then there was me, the middle child, the one who seemed to catch every virus that went around, who developed migraines in high school, who couldn't shake the exhaustion that dogged me most days. Every complaint was met with the same response: "You're fine, stop being dramatic." Over time, I internalized their skepticism. I began to doubt my own body's signals, to push myself when I shouldn't, to apologize for limitations I couldn't control. By college, I was accustomed to powering through pain, ignoring symptoms, and minimizing my own suffering, even to doctors who might have helped if I'd been honest about the severity of my symptoms. The fatigue began about a year ago, not the normal tiredness after a long day, but a bone-deep exhaustion that sleep couldn't touch. I'd wake up feeling as if I hadn't rested at all. Simple tasks became monumental challenges. Walking up a flight of stairs left me winded. My brain felt foggy, making concentration nearly impossible. Then came the unexplained bruises, appearing on my arms and legs without any memory of injury, the persistent sore throat, the night sweats that left my sheets soaked by morning, the weight loss despite no changes to my diet. I knew something was wrong, but years of conditioning made me hesitate to seek help. When I finally gathered the courage to see a doctor, I downplayed my symptoms, almost apologizing for taking up her time. Despite my minimization, she ordered blood tests and referred me to a specialist. The concern in her eyes triggered both relief and terror. Finally, someone was taking me seriously, but what if something was truly wrong? I didn't tell my family about the medical appointments. I knew what they would say, how they would react. I'd heard it all before. Instead, I went alone, sitting in sterile waiting rooms, answering the same questions over and over, extending my arm for yet another blood draw. More tests followed: a bone marrow biopsy that hurt more than I was prepared for, CT scans, specialist consultations. Through it all, I told no one, carrying the weight of uncertainty by myself. When my supervisor at work noticed my declining performance and increasing sick days, I finally confided in her. Her empathy was overwhelming, so different from what I was accustomed to at home. She helped me arrange a flexible schedule to accommodate my medical appointments, a kindness I hadn't expected. The crisis point came during a family gathering at my parents' house. It was my father's birthday, and attendance was mandatory, regardless of how I felt. I dragged myself there despite the fever that had been hovering for days, the exhaustion that made every movement an effort. My Aunt Martha, my father's sister and his equal in skepticism toward illness, noticed me picking at my food. "Not eating, Cassie? Too good for your mother's cooking?" she asked, her tone light but with an edge. "I'm just not very hungry," I replied, trying to deflect. "You've lost weight," my mother observed, her brow furrowing slightly. "Are you on one of those crash diets?" Before I could answer, my father interjected. "She's always doing something for attention. Remember that gluten thing last year?" The gluten thing had been a doctor re-recommended elimination diet to determine if I had a sensitivity. I'd abandoned it after weeks of family mockery. "I'm not on a diet," I said quietly. "I just haven't had much appetite lately." My sister Emma rolled her eyes. "Must be nice. I have to work out 5 days a week to maintain my weight." The conversation shifted, as it always did, away from any acknowledgement of my struggles. I excused myself to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face, trying to summon the energy to make it through the rest of the evening. When I returned, they were discussing my recent absences from family events. "Cassie's been MIA a lot lately," my brother Jake commented. "Too busy with that big city job to visit the folks?" Actually, I've been dealing with some health issues, I said, seizing the moment. Maybe now, as adults, they would listen. The silence that followed was brief, broken by my father's scoff. Health issues? Like what? I've been having some symptoms that concern my doctor, I said, intentionally vague. I still didn't have a definitive diagnosis, just a growing sense of dread based on the increasingly serious tests and specialists. You've always been a hypochondriac, my Aunt Martha said dismissively. Remember when you were convinced you had mono in high school? I did have mono, I corrected her. I was diagnosed by the doctor. After you insisted on tests, my father added. You've always been quick to run to doctors for every little thing. The familiar shame washed over me, but this time it mingled with something new, anger. I was an adult, sitting at this table despite feeling awful, and they still couldn't extend the basic courtesy of believing me. I'm not making this up, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. I've had multiple tests, and the doctors are concerned. My mother looked uncomfortable, caught, as usual, between my father's dismissal and her own maternal instincts. What kind of tests, honey? Before I could answer, my father interrupted. Don't encourage her, Linda. She's always looking for excuses. Excuses for what? I asked, the question that had plagued me for years finally finding voice. What exactly am I trying to get out of being sick? The tension around the table thickened. This wasn't how we operated as a family. We didn't confront. We didn't question authority, especially my father's. Attention, he said bluntly. You've always needed more attention than the other kids. The accusation stung, piercing years of carefully constructed defenses. That's not true, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. I'm genuinely not feeling well. I have been for months. You're just being lazy, my dad snapped, his patience visibly thinning. You need to toughen up, Cassie. The world doesn't stop because you have a headache. My aunt nodded in agreement. You always want attention, even as a little girl. You'd cry over the smallest scrape. The familiar accusations continued, washing over me as I sat there, too exhausted to defend myself further. My siblings remained silent, eyes fixed on their plates, unwilling to either support me or join in the criticism. Then, in one of life's perfectly timed moments, my phone rang. I had placed it on the table earlier, and in the tense silence following my aunt's comment, the ringtone seemed exceptionally loud. The screen displayed Dr. Wilson's office. My doctor had warned me she'd call as soon as she had the results from my latest tests. With a sense of both dread and vindication, I answered, putting it on speaker without thinking, my hands shaking too much to hold it to my ear. Hello, Cassie. This is Dr. Wilson, came the professional voice through the speaker, clearly audible to everyone at the table. Yes, I'm here, I replied. You're on speaker. There was a brief pause. Is this a good time to discuss your results? I looked around the table at my family's faces, a mix of annoyance and curiosity. Yes, it's fine. We got your results back from the oncology panel, Dr. Wilson continued, her tone gentle but direct. I'm afraid it confirms our suspicions. It's stage 2 Hodgkin's lymphoma. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The good news, she continued into the stunned silence, is that the prognosis for stage 2 is quite good with proper treatment. I'd like you to come in tomorrow to discuss our next steps. We'll want to start chemotherapy as soon as possible. I'll be there, I managed to say, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. Do you have someone who can come with you? These conversations can be overwhelming. I looked around the table at my family's shocked faces. I'm not sure yet. I'll let you know. After confirming the appointment time and ending the call, I sat in the profound silence that had fallen over the dining room. No one seemed to know where to look or what to say. My father's face had lost its color, my mother's eyes had filled with tears, and even my Aunt Martha appeared stricken. Cassie, my mother finally whispered. Why didn't you tell us it was this serious? The question, so innocent yet so loaded, broke something in me. Years of dismissed complaints, minimized pain, and accusations of attention-seeking surged forth in my response. Would you have believed me? I asked simply. No one answered. They didn't need to. We all knew the truth. The days that followed were a blur of activity. Suddenly, my illness was real to them. My mother insisted on accompanying me to every appointment, taking furious notes, asking questions I was too overwhelmed to formulate. My father, uncomfortable with emotional displays, focused on practical matters, researching treatment centers and creating spreadsheets of medical costs and insurance coverage. My siblings, unsure how to navigate this new reality, expressed their support awkwardly but sincerely. Jake offered to drive me to treatments. Emma researched nutrition for cancer patients. The transformation was both gratifying and frustrating. The support I had craved for so long was finally mine, but it took a catastrophic diagnosis to earn it. Part of me wanted to reject their help out of spite, to throw back at them all the years of dismissal and disbelief. But cancer has a way of putting petty grievances into perspective. I needed them, and they were trying in their own imperfect ways to be there for me. The first chemotherapy session was a family affair, with both parents and siblings crowding into the treatment room until the nurses gently suggested that perhaps not everyone needed to be present for the entire 6-hour infusion. They reluctantly established a rotation, ensuring I was never alone but not overwhelmed by their collective anxiety. As the weeks passed and treatment took its toll, I watched my family struggle to reconcile their perception of me as the dramatic one with the reality of my physical decline. The hair loss, the constant nausea, the infections that sent me to the emergency room due to my compromised immune system. These were undeniable manifestations of an illness they could no longer attribute to weakness of character. My father perhaps had the most difficult adjustment. His worldview, so rigid and defined, had been fundamentally challenged. I caught him once, standing in the doorway of the guest room where I was staying during treatment, watching me sleep. When I opened my eyes, I saw something I had never witnessed before: tears tracking silently down his weathered face. "I should have listened," he said simply. Those 5 words contained multitudes: an apology, an acknowledgement, a promise. They didn't erase the past, but they opened a door to a different future. My Aunt Martha's redemption came more gradually. She began by bringing casseroles, then progressed to offering rides to appointments, and finally to sitting with me during particularly rough days, holding cool cloths to my forehead when the nausea was overwhelming. She never explicitly apologized for doubting me, but her actions spoke of regret and a desire to make amends. 6 months into treatment, during a family dinner that had become a weekly tradition, my oncologist called with results from my latest scan. This time, when I answered on speaker, it was a conscious choice, surrounded by people who now held their breath in unified concern. "The treatment is working, Cassie," Dr. Wilson announced, her usually measured tone lifting with optimism. "The tumors have reduced significantly. If this continues, we're looking at a complete remission." The celebration that followed was cathartic, a release of collective tension that had been building since that first revealing call during my father's birthday dinner. As we toasted with sparkling cider, alcohol being off-limits during my treatment, I looked around at these people who had doubted me for so long, but now formed my fiercest support system. Cancer, terrible as it was, had given me a voice that could finally be heard. My symptoms were no longer dismissed as exaggerations. My need for rest was no longer attributed to laziness. My pain was acknowledged as real. One evening, as my mother sat with me through a particularly difficult night of side effects, she broached the subject we had all been dancing around. "I failed you," she said quietly, stroking my forehead in a gesture that transported me back to the rare occasions in childhood when my illnesses had been deemed legitimate enough for comfort. "All those years, I knew something wasn't right, I felt it, but I let your father and everyone else convince me it was nothing." "Why?" I asked, the question simple, but the answer complex. She sighed. "It was easier, I suppose. To believe you were fine meant I didn't have to worry. Didn't have to fight the system to get you help. Didn't have to admit there might be something seriously wrong." She paused, her hand stilling. "It was selfish. And I'm so sorry." That conversation was the first of many as my family grappled with their role in my delayed diagnosis. The cancer had been growing for longer than it should have, the symptoms ignored until they became impossible to dismiss. Would earlier intervention have meant a less aggressive treatment plan, a shorter recovery? We would never know. What we did know was that moving forward required a new foundation, one built on trust and belief rather than skepticism and dismissal. A year after that fateful phone call, I sat in Dr. Wilson's office for what would hopefully be my final treatment. The scans showed no evidence of disease, though I would require regular checkups for years to come. The physical ordeal was ending, but the emotional journey of our family's transformation continued. As I rang the ceremonial bell in the treatment center, signifying the completion of my chemotherapy, my entire family stood behind me, cheering loudly enough to draw smiles from the nurses who had witnessed our evolution from a fractured unit to a unified team. Later, at the celebration dinner my siblings had organized, my father raised his glass in a toast. Public speeches were not his forte, and his discomfort was evident, but he pushed through. "To Cassie," he said, his voice gruff with emotion, "who taught us the most important lesson we've ever learned, that listening is an act of love, and disbelief can be its own kind of cruelty." I caught my mother wiping away tears, saw my siblings nodding in solemn agreement. My Aunt Martha, seated beside me, squeezed my hand beneath the table. The journey had been brutal, the lessons hard-won. Cancer is not a gift, and I would never frame my experience as something I was grateful for. But in forcing my family to confront their patterns of dismissal and disbelief, it had catalyzed a transformation that might never have happened otherwise. As a child, I had dreamed of being truly heard, of having my experiences validated rather than dismissed. It had taken a disease nearly taking my life for that dream to be realized. The cost was unconscionably high, but the result? A family that now knew how to listen, to believe, to support without qualification, was invaluable. Today, 3 years after that phone call interrupted my father's birthday dinner, I am healthy. The cancer remains in remission, but the true healing happened in the spaces between medical treatments, in the conversations that rebuilt trust, in the apologies offered and accepted, in the new patterns of interaction that replaced the old. When I call home now and say I'm not feeling well, the response is immediate concern rather than skepticism. When I need to cancel plans due to fatigue, there are no accusations of laziness. My experiences are mine to define, my symptoms real, simply because I say they are. It shouldn't have taken a doctor's voice on speakerphone delivering life-altering news to a table full of doubters to earn me this basic respect. But having walked through fire to reach this point, I guard these hard-won gains fiercely, determined that neither I nor anyone else in our family will ever again have to prove their suffering to deserve compassion. Last month, my younger cousin Lily, just 16, came to stay with me for a weekend. Away from the watchful eyes of the family, she confided that she'd been experiencing persistent headaches and fatigue. Her mother, my Aunt Martha, had told her it was just stress from school and that she needed to toughen up. "I believe you," I told her without hesitation. Those 3 words made her eyes fill with tears. The next day, I took her to my doctor. Tests revealed she had severe anemia, easily treatable but potentially serious if ignored. When we called my aunt to explain, I heard the shame in her voice, the echo of our family's pattern nearly repeating itself with the next generation. "I should have listened," she said, unconsciously echoing my father's words from years ago. "Now you know better," I replied gently. "Now we all do." My experience has rippled outward in other ways too. My father, once so dismissive of all ailments, now volunteers at the cancer center where I receive treatment, driving patients to and from their appointments. My mother has become an advocate for early detection, organizing community health screenings and information sessions. My brother Jake, the tough one who never complained, recently admitted to struggling with chronic back pain for years. Instead of hiding it as he once would have, he sought treatment, with the full support of our father who once would have told him to walk it off. As for me, I've become something of a family health coordinator, the one everyone calls when they're uncertain about symptoms or need support navigating the healthcare system. It's a role I never sought, but one I fulfill gladly, knowing that each time I help someone access care without shame, I'm helping rewrite our family's relationship with illness and vulnerability. Yesterday, I found a journal I kept during my treatment. Reading through those raw, often angry entries reminded me how far we've come. There was one passage that particularly stood out, written after a difficult round of chemo. "I still don't know if I can forgive them for not believing me all those years. What I do know is that cancer shouldn't have been what it took for them to listen. No one should need a doctor's voice on speakerphone to validate their pain." Those words still ring true. The anger has largely faded, replaced by understanding that my family was operating from their own wounds and limitations. But the principle remains. Belief should be the default, not something earned through suffering or external validation. That fateful phone call during my father's birthday dinner changed everything. In the shocked silence that followed the doctor's words, our family began a transformation. It shouldn't have taken a cancer diagnosis to teach us the value of believing each other, but some lessons come at a terrible price. If there's wisdom to be gained from my journey, it's this: listen when someone tells you they're hurting. Believe them the first time. The most powerful words in any language aren't "I love you," but "I believe you." My family learned this lesson the hardest way possible, but they did learn. And in that learning, in that fundamental shift from skepticism to belief, from dismissal to support, we found a new way to be a family, one where vulnerability isn't weakness, where asking for help isn't attention-seeking, where pain doesn't need to be proven to be acknowledged. That phone call was both an ending and a beginning. The end of being silenced, the beginning of being heard. The end of isolation, the beginning of true support. The end of having to fight to validate my experiences, the beginning of being believed simply because I said it was so. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if the doctor hadn't called at that precise moment, if my family had never been forced to confront the reality of my illness so dramatically. Would I have continued to suffer in silence? Would they have continued to dismiss my concerns? Would it have taken something even worse for them to finally believe me? I'll never know, but what I do know is that change is possible, even in the most entrenched family systems. It may come at a devastating cost, but when it happens, when people truly learn to listen and believe, the healing extends far beyond the physical. My cancer is in remission. The disease that nearly took my life has retreated. But the true recovery happened in those moments when my father admitted he should have listened, when my mother acknowledged her failure to advocate for me, when my siblings learned to see me as I am rather than as they assumed me to be. In the end, it wasn't just my body that needed healing. It was our entire family's ability to recognize suffering, to value truth over convenience, to choose compassion over judgment. That healing continues every day, with every symptom believed, every concern validated, every pain acknowledged without question. The doctor's voice on speakerphone did more than diagnose my cancer. It diagnosed a family dysfunction that had persisted for generations. And in that diagnosis, painful as it was, lay the possibility of a cure for something far more insidious than cancer, the skepticism that prevents us from truly seeing each other's suffering. Today, when someone in my family says, "I don't feel well," they are met with concern instead of suspicion. It's a simple shift, but it has made all the difference. And in that difference lies our redemption.